Thank you for joining us today. Our agenda for today will consist of about 30 minutes of discussion from our presenters. During the webinar, we will ask you for your viewpoint when we request you to respond to some polls. At the end of 30 minutes, we will take questions and answers from the audience. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please send your comments via the chat or the dialog box that you will see on your screen in the right-hand corner, and we will try to respond as soon as we can. So let's go ahead and start. Bitzer Mobile is a leading enterprise mobility solution provider. Its solution enhances employee productivity by allowing secure access to corporate apps and data from mobile devices while preserving rich user experience. Its secure container solution creates the enterprise workspace on any mobile device, corporate-owned or personal, and it works for all mobile platforms. Slalom Consulting brings together business and technology expertise to help companies drive enterprise performance, accelerate innovation, enhance the customer experience, and increase employee productivity. We are delighted to have our two panelists here today, Frank Traina and Ernie Huber. Frank Traina is the practice lead at Slalom Consulting, where he focuses on integrated digital channel strategy and implementation with a specialty in mobile. He has been supporting clients in using mobile to change business models and better connect with employees, partners, and consumers. Prior to joining Slalom, he worked in Accenture's mobile practice for 12 years. Frank lives with his wife and two sons on Long Island and is also an active CrossFitter and home brewer. So welcome, Frank.
Thanks, Naima. Happy to be here. Hello, everyone.
So will you be sharing any tips on home brewing, or is that a separate webinar?
Separate webinar. A little bit early to drink for folks on the West Coast.
Okay, so everybody just stay tuned for that invite if you're interested in that. So delighted to have you. Ernie Huber is responsible for Slalom's consulting practices in the Hartford market, including mobile, cloud applications, and CRM. Previously, he worked at Stanley Black Decker in a number of roles, including divisional CIO, lead on enterprise mobility team, and at KPMG Consulting. Ernie lives in Central Connecticut and enjoys being a sous chef for his wife and really enjoys good wine. Welcome, Ernie.
Thank you, Naima. I'm very happy to be here as well.
Okay, so I believe I am going to hand it over to Ernie, and we are ready to roll.
Great. Thank you again. So, in just a few short years, mobile devices, in other words, smartphones and tablets, went from being a nice-to-have to a can't live without, right? Things like instant messaging, chat, social media, video calling through things like Skype and FaceTime are all uses that we're very comfortable with personally. And of course now, more often, it's business applications we're talking about. And it starts with basics like email and calendar and contacts. But once you get a taste for this type of productivity, you can't imagine why everything can't be done from your mobile device. The younger generations that are coming into the workforce over the next 5 or so years, they won't know anything but mobile. Touch, motion, or maybe even a voice interface. But the key for them is really going to be access from anywhere that they deem to be a work location, anytime they feel they need to get work done. And unlike many other technology advancements, mobile is not passing by the generation that is late in their careers or has even exited the workforce. And why is that? The mobile phenomenon is based on the fact that it's easy to use and it's intuitive. And this has certainly raised the bar on us from an expectation perspective for those in the enterprise.
I have a quick question, Ernie. This is Frank on wearables. Are you seeing any of your Hartford clients experimenting with Google Glass yet? You can't even access the developer APIs unless you were one of the very select people to get a prototype.
I haven't seen that, Frank, in the enterprise just yet. I do know a few folks that are experimenting with the smartwatch, and I've heard nothing but good things from them. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. Not so much on those things just yet. However, I expect we'll be getting lots of requests for those things in the near future.
Yeah, and if we could just stay on that slide, Naima. So, we're really just getting started. It's easy to forget that the first iPhone was released in 2007. And it may not have been the first smartphone that was ever made, but it definitely changed the landscape. And the original iPad was released just 3 short years ago, again, which really sparked the tablet space. And to Frank's point, now we're talking about wearable computers, right? Google Glass, smartwatches, and telematics, which are targeting that untapped productivity opportunity known as your commute time. Enterprise mobility certainly gives us all a lot to think about. And there's plenty of buzzwords and acronyms to go around. Left to their own devices, your users will find a way, right? Whether it be the device or the applications that they want to use or where they want to store the information that they need to access. And the days of dictating what the users will do and needing them to wait until IT is ready to make a change are over. In the end, we need to find a balance that yields the greatest productivity for our users while minimizing the amount of risk we have to the enterprise. Now, in my personal experience at Stanley Black & Decker, we identified some pretty compelling enterprise mobility use cases. It started with the sales and service organizations who already had tablets for very specific requirements. Then we heard from our C-suite who wanted to conduct their quarterly business reviews and do their investor presentations from their tablets. And finally, we heard that the board of directors was actually interested in receiving meeting materials electronically. Some of them actually indicated they wanted to view them on their tablets as well. So if you're like us, you follow a standard process, right? You conduct research, you evaluate options. In our case, we used a cross-functional team that included representation from the various business units, and then a number of corporate functions like finance and IT and legal. And then you decide, right, which option gives your users the greatest productivity with the least amount of risk to the enterprise at the right cost that you as an organization can support.
Hey, Ernie, Frank again. I just had a quick question. When you were the group CIO at Black & Decker, did you have any concerns or issues or things that worked well with aligning stakeholders across an organization for a new capability?
So in our example, it was pretty easy. We had a group of people who were very interested in participating. They had some very compelling use cases, as I mentioned, and so they were very willing participants. From my experience, I think the key is really getting a group of stakeholders who are excited about helping with making decisions on new technology and so forth, and keeping them engaged. Right? Don't make this a one-time event when you do have a use case that you want to address. Find those people who are passionate about it and keep them engaged on a regular basis.
Yeah, we see a lot of the same with our clients in the New York market. I'd say about half of our clients want us to just help them implementing some mobile service, where the other half of us, other half of the clients want us to work with them to develop the capability. So we're not just doing the work and leaving, but we're actually working side by side with certain people that want to get new skill sets and whatnot.
Got it. So Naima, I think we're going to go to you for our first poll.
Yes. So everybody on the line, we're going to have the first poll. If you could please share your experience and let us know how your organization is extending SharePoint on mobile devices. We would love to hear from you, and we'll give everybody, a minute or so to give us their feedback, and then we'll put up the results and see what we got. So hopefully all of you can see the poll. Okay, I think the results are going to come up any minute. And Frank and Ernie, you don't get to vote, unfortunately.
Okay.
All right, so let's have the results, please. All right, so what do you think, Ernie and Frank?
That's pretty interesting. More that are actually executing on it than I expected. Pretty even with those who are planning. Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, same here. I'm encouraged to see about 35% of the folks here on this call are planning to do so this year, but even more impressed to see that 35% of the folks are actually extending SharePoint to mobile. It's an imperative use case.
Okay, good. So we can go back to our discussion.
Some additional considerations to think about when you're faced with coming up with a solution for use cases like I mentioned. In separate reports, both Gartner and Business Insider reported that mobile phones will surpass the PC as the primary means for accessing the internet this year. And Mary Meeker from Kleiner Perkins, in her Internet Trends update that she does annually, said that tablet shipments have surpassed both desktops and laptops, and that's in just 3 years since its introduction. And then finally, at the annual SharePoint conference, Microsoft quoted that they have over 160 million people with access to SharePoint. So, we were not, as we were looking at options here, we were not unique in this. A lot of people are having these same challenges and probably considering the same options that we were. So I think if you move to the next slide, we can talk about, the final decision that we ended up making at Stanley Black & Decker. So, we determined that we had a sizable investment in SharePoint. Both from a cost perspective and a resource perspective, right? We had the support organization in place for SharePoint. We had the information security in place. So the answer for us was to leverage SharePoint. But then the question came, well, what about the usability on the mobile device for SharePoint? And I think this is a great point to transition to Frank to kind of give his perspectives on usability of SharePoint on mobile devices and some use cases that he's seen with some of his clients. Right?
Sure. Thanks, Ernie. All right, we could do the next slide. Perfect. So what we hear, right? So SharePoint is great. It could serve as a backbone for nearly every single collaboration use case that any business could think of. It's also secure, relatively straightforward to manage if it was an IT service. But out of the box, let's be honest here, it's not the most user-friendly or a very mobile service at all. On the flip side, the consumer apps that we use to improve our own personal productivity has a great user experience, right? It's very simple. But there's lots of security folks who beat their chest and say it's not secure, and I have to agree with them. The lack of enterprise security, lack of integration to directories and those types of things are mandatory in a corporate setting, especially for those regulated environments where e-discovery is such a core use case. What if we could take the best of both worlds, right? So let's imagine a mashup of a positive user experience along with an enterprise-grade collaboration tool. So what would that enable you to do? Clearly you could react more quickly as business needs form, and as we know, and Ernie shared with us previously, that collaboration use cases and SharePoint, these things are here to stay, and certainly we need to exploit their value. But also achieving a single device, right? So there's certain knowledge workers or use cases that are going to ditch their PC altogether. How do you achieve some of that in an organization that's so driven by documents such as the Office suite of documents? There's also the ability to prevent ambitious lines of business. They're going to home grow their own solutions. I've worked with businesses to help them grow solutions, and I've worked with IT organizations to help manage those solutions in a more effective way. So ShareBox is this term that we just made up, right? It's a coin term. It's not registered at all. There's no trademark on it, so feel free to use it in your dialogue. But it's really taking the best of SharePoint and the best of Dropbox, and creating this use case of document collaboration while offline for mobile. So there's certainly power in creating a pseudo file system for your files and folders, especially on the mobile device. Let's go to the next screenshot, and we could show some screenshots on the next slide. Great. So screenshot on the left, right? We're depicting a mobile app that actually we use quite a bit at Slalom. It allows us to collaborate on files, our personal folders, and also bring attachments from email or other mobile apps directly into our SharePoint environment. Okay. Now, the screenshot on the right is depicting an actual client implementation on the same use case. This was done for a global pharma company. We're going to discuss this case study a little bit later in the presentation. But one thing you should notice here, both of these screenshots depict a very clean interface. They're intuitive from the start. That's because the applications were built using best-in-breed native tools, common design paradigms that users are very familiar with. And this is important because we're in the app world right now. Usability needs to work. It needs to be intuitive. Gone are the days where we can deploy systems that take 8, 10 months to deploy, and we have a 3-month training system to go along with that. I think that our users, whether they be corporate folks or even consumer folks, they don't have the appetite for those things anymore. So how is this all done? This is actually very doable. Okay, so there's a combination of tools and applications that we'll discuss offered by both SharePoint and today's mobile devices, that any SharePoint application can be enabled to have content-driven apps. So there's actually 3 key ways for us to mobilize SharePoint. One way is to build something custom, which is what this approach is that we're talking about here today, and typically the approach that we take. Most of our clients have found that third-party apps might not have worked for them, so they decided to do something a little more bespoke for their needs. The second way to do this is to buy a mobile application that can access SharePoint, right? SharePlus is out there. I think Microsoft is deploying a mobile version of SharePoint in the near future. So there's certainly an option there. The third way is to use an enterprise mobile platform, right? Even Bitzer's got some phenomenal products to help for email attachments to access them in a secure way. But there's lots of ways to distribute apps to multiple platforms while maintaining those interfaces to SharePoint or any other backend for that matter. So if we look at kind of what Microsoft makes available, most people know this already that are very familiar with SharePoint, but some folks aren't very familiar with this. But there's a common document access API library that's listed, and it enables you to do things like search, view, upload, synchronize, as well as access favorites, such as lists and other enterprise social collaboration tools. Those things are all available in SharePoint today, and again, SharePoint could be the system of record in the back end, but it's also extendable to other channels, mobile included, whether it be any mobile device, iOS, Windows Phone, BlackBerry, you name it. Any of these devices can access these APIs from Microsoft. Now on the mobile side, on the right-hand side of the slide, you're noticing some of the security features. So all the software development kits today available from native application providers, and by native I'm speaking about the platform providers, they have lots of tools for security, right? You could leverage mobile encryption for local storage. I think gone are the days where people can say we can't use mobile because it's not secure. We're seeing mobile now, and even iOS devices trickle into such industries as government and financial services. That's because these devices out of the box can handle AES 256-bit encryption, which is really a gold standard. And through a programming interface, we can actually create the application and the container that secures the content within that application from a mobile device itself. That way, if you have devices that are in a BYO model and you're accessing them through some corporate managed device management functions, you can actually kill an application and also kill all the data that goes with that. So that container concept is actually becoming a very standard way to enforce security and consistency on mobile devices. We could also, the last bullet point on the slide on the right-hand side here, is to limit documents for in-app only. So we see lots of clients when they're approaching their mobile strategies to say, hey, no mobile apps, forget it. We're going to do everything connected. And that's okay too, that's fine. But how do you limit access to applications and files rather for read-only when you're connected? And again, these things are all doable through a mobile device and the API layer offered through SharePoint. We're actually
we have a poll now. So if I can ask the audience one more time to give us some of their feedback so we can understand what the audience is seeing in terms of their organizations for enabling mobile SharePoint. So everybody, if you could just click on the screen and answer the question, and we'll give everybody a minute to weigh in. All right, I think we're getting most of the results are coming in, and we're probably ready to get the results. And then Frank and Ernie, you can share with us how it matches up with what you are seeing in with your clients.
Well, I see the results right here. Again, very interesting that most organizations are using the mobile apps. I do think deploying mobile apps is a more complicated way of doing things. However, it reflects an ability to control more of the application experience on the mobile device. The mobile platforms, again, I think equally a great fit for the organization that has a need to do that way, to do things that way. And the mobile platforms, do encapsulate some of the complexities, which could be a very tricky thing for an organization to build capabilities. So the platforms are also a great way to do things like that. For those of you who are not mobilizing or don't know, I hope you guys learned something from this webinar, and hopefully we could have conversations in the future to see if you need any help. Ernie, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I would agree, Frank. And interesting to see a fairly even split between the mobile app and the mobile platform. I was kind of surprised by that.
Well, okay. Good. It's good data to have. So we'll continue on with our discussion and move on to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Naima. So we spent a lot of time talking about the share box concept. Let's ditch the PCs and give people mobile devices only, and they'll get the same access to SharePoint that they would on a PC. I think that's a good use case, but I don't think it's the most powerful use case. So if there's one key takeaway of this entire webinar, it should be that incredible apps can be created that are driving business value using the content that's housed and managed in your SharePoint and your SharePoint investments. So when I say content-driven enterprise applications here, we see this on the slide. That really just means SharePoint's going to be your content management system in the back end. Right? This enables you to take your enterprise tablets or smartphones and make them more than just email or PIN checkers. It enables you to use best-in-breed development tools to create those engaging interfaces that these mobile devices have created such buzz with in the consumer world. And also, the important thing is when you're leveraging your investments in SharePoint, all those permissions and access and security and directory integration, that's all built in. So that doesn't have to be recreated. And on the flip side, the tools like Dropbox that have absolutely nothing, you could kind of keep those tools at bay and really make sure in your strategy that your end users know that these tools are not a corporate standard. And let them know about the differences and the security risks. Okay, so there's some challenges. Certainly the approach of creating apps that use SharePoint content comes with challenges. Take, for example, that spreadsheet-driven business, right? We come across them all the time. They always want business as usual. These groups, they tend to manage their businesses with spreadsheets, typically, tons of columns, embedded macros, and they drop them on their, Android Galaxy tab, and they realize, oh, this doesn't work at all. And they're going to point a finger back and, make someone support this for them. But the reality is they should be thinking more in the app world. If you propose a single-purpose application for their users, they might start kicking and screaming, right? So the single-purpose app that leverages Excel data is often the correct way, school book solution to enable these users. So it really depends on your organization's mobile maturity when it comes to these types of things. Tablets and smartphones also are not PCs. So again, if we think that we're going to ditch PCs and then add slate devices or tablet devices instead, a lot of CIOs, they see mobile device as additive. Right? They want to say, well, hold on, we're going to add mobile. Can we take away PCs? The reality is many PCs are needed. Right? You can't do advanced and complex word processing or annotating comments on PowerPoint slides, for example, on a mobile device, unless you had a really powerful processor on those mobile devices. But the reality is several use cases still require a PC. And the last point here, corporate capabilities, even as a consulting organization, we've got hundreds of people that are very well versed in using mobile on multiple different platforms, and as new versions of operating systems come out and new form factors are created, it's tough. It's tough for us even to keep up with these capabilities. So we certainly imagine our clients are equally challenged with these things. So.
Hey Frank, any ideas or advice that you have that would help sort of drive the improved adoption of the corporate deployed apps?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ernie. Oftentimes, we find a very ambitious line of business manager that wants to, take their existing business app and mobilize it, and we do it, and then we suffer some poor adoption. So that happens. What we find is that the mobile services themselves have to be so closely tied to the user and their interaction that has to be indispensable, right? Because if these mobile devices just end up sitting in the back of someone's trunk or in someone's house, not getting the value, you're really missing out on your investments on going mobile. So one way we found, quite honestly, if you wanted to tie someone's commission or bonus or comp structure to the use cases of going mobile, I guarantee you that people will be using mobile devices. So we've seen certain use cases where we have, for example, executive communications happen through the mobile devices over a video channel, right? Very low-tech ways. A senior executive might record themselves using their built-in camera. We store that video in the cloud, and now all the people that report up to the executive can get more of a personal touch. So things that correspond to the business and things that are very near and dear to the end user's heart.
Yeah, I would just add that a really strong change management program that you start very early on, and then having continuous communications, which should also really help drive that adoption as well.
True. Okay, so case studies. We actually promised in the invitation we discussed a couple scenarios where we're deploying SharePoint to mobile in the BYO world. So we're going to spend a little time talking about two scenarios. The first scenario is actually, we did for ourselves at Slalom Consulting, so it's more of an eat-your-own-dog food thing. I promise to just keep it to the data points and not go too far into any other messaging. But the second scenario is something we actually have done for a client. Okay, so the first one is a professional services industry, again, consulting organization of about 2,200 employees, a growing organization. So in the organization, we've got business development executives, and they always need a consistent way of understanding our client experiences. So as this organization is growing to 12 markets, our newer business development execs aren't always aware of the work completed in other markets. So that's a business problem. So moving to the solution, we had SharePoint, and SharePoint was used to house all of our approved public-facing credentials. So our credentials were, after a series of approvals, got posted up to SharePoint. And those series of approvals, it's pretty serious business, right? So if we do work for a client, and our client doesn't want us to share their logo or their name, or our project was so strategic they don't want us to even talk about it, it's very important we have those safety checks along the way so that our business development execs know not to divulge clients' personal information or private intellectual property in a conversation. So all that workflow is happening in the back end in SharePoint. So before a credential even makes it to the point where we could share it, it's gone through several revisions. We've got sign-offs from our client. Perhaps a video testimonial goes along with that. But all that content and media is now housed in SharePoint. To bring it mobile, what we did was we created a mobile application that accessed SharePoint and only accessed that folder that is housing the copy, content, multimedia that's been approved by our client to share externally. Okay, so the benefits. What this enables. So now our clients and prospects, everyone's getting one version of the truth, which has been approved for sharing, regardless of which market they're in or who's explaining the project experience. So this enables us, in a way, to be the McDonald's of the consulting organizations. What this does, it enables us to have an increase. It led to an increase in sales activity. What we saw here was that we saw after a meeting, after our reps had these types of devices in their hands, we saw meetings jumped by an increase of 29%. So any activity that happened as a result of us using these tools, we saw an increase. Now, what that enabled us to do, we enabled ourselves to see metrics into the usage of the application. So we can understand which business development executives are using this tool. Which credentials are they often showing? And tied to our opportunities in our CRM database, we're able to make a better use of the collaboration tools and also the copy that we're creating to best represent the work that we do for our clients.
Hey, Frank, I would also add that, in the Hartford market, this Spotlight app, it's great not only to learn about what the company is doing and being able to find these case studies, but it also is a great motivation for people who want to get their project experience included. So displaying it this way also really helps with the content creation aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finding the same thing, and as our markets are growing, we find that sharing is often something that you really can't force upon people. However, if they could be showcased in this application, they feel some sense of pride. So we find that we're getting more requests to submit public credentials, through these types of tools because people want to be featured on this service in this app. Okay, so our next scenario here is a client example. This was a healthcare company. They've got about 270 different operating companies globally across 60 different countries. Large organization, about 130,000 people. The end users that we considered for this service were roughly 7,000 field reps. And what we found out on the business problem is that lots of business units were deploying these mobile devices. But the field reps, they couldn't really get access to files in SharePoint or their SkyDrive Pro accounts. Some of them were buying third-party apps, through exclusions in the process or circumventing the process. Other people were, trying to browse to different SharePoint folders on limited browsers that are designed for touch interface and not necessarily the most conducive for using SharePoint services. So, through this bad user experience and one-off purchases of third-party apps, it became a little bit of a situation. Also, on the problem was that when people had issues with the apps that they were purchasing that weren't corporate standard, they were calling the corporate help desk. So the corporate help desk is scratching their heads trying to figure out, well, hold on, wait a second. We don't have a script for supporting these end users. So it became a situation. So the solution, as we're seeing right here, we actually used the interface layer to SharePoint 2013, and actually the SkyDrive Pro. SkyDrive Pro and SharePoint, all these things have a very similar access layer through WSDLs or Web Service APIs. We created this mobile app, and we only built in those features that were necessary to the field users. Now, use cases such as moving or renaming, synchronizing, unsynchronizing, we built all these directly into the app. In addition, we built a custom quiz in a collaboration with IT security and compliance to help the field reps understand what types of classified data they should or should not be syncing to their mobile devices. So this was a scenario where there's a policy that restricted certain types of information to be shared on mobile. So we did our best to lock down those policies through tools, but also reaffirm the usage of those things with the users through some type of training directly from the app. So what were some of the benefits? With the mixed mobile devices in the field, employees can now be productive while reviewing or interacting SharePoint data. Without the solution, the client was actually risking low adoption of their SharePoint Pro investments, and their SkyDrive Pro investments, rather. And the other situation we came to understand, these reps are spending 90% of their time in the field. So 90% of the time in the field means 10% of their time not in the field. And if these reps have to go home after their long day and spend 2 hours updating their systems of record, whether it be an ERP system or a CRM system, it was definitely an issue. It was definitely an issue. So with the mobile device, taking advantage of the field reps' downtime, we're able to do these things, introducing these types of tools. Okay, I think we could move on, Naima, and you could see if we've got any questions for discussion, please.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ernie and Frank, for a very engaging and informative discussion. As the audience can see on the slide here, we have put up some resources that are available to you post-webinar if you would like to get some additional information, and you can get more information from both Bitzer Mobile and Slalom Consulting and get some more interesting data. We're ready to take some questions from the audience and kind of go through what people want to find out more about. So let's look at our questions. What do we get? Oh, this is a good one. Is there a strategy to expand the user base within Slalom for the mobile solution you guys developed, the Spotlight solution, I guess?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Naima. We pilot a lot of things, right, as a consulting organization. And a lot of times we don't want to invest too heavily in one certain solution until we see that there's value in it. So this application, which actually we call Spotlight, we did a limited release to a few different markets and found out that the usage was so positive that we continued to build it and grow it that way. So really now that we've realized it's an important channel on mobile, we've continued to expand that to other channels as well. So we have a whole credential mart now on our SharePoint sites for people to pull down certain files that they can use in presentations on a PC. We continue to train people on the usage of the application itself. In fact, we've even created a game. This game is based upon the information in this application where people could compete with how well they have knowledge on other markets and other clients who are doing work. Ernie, anything else you're seeing for adoption in your markets?
I have seen some additional communications come out, Frank, where they sort of give a summary on what's new that's been posted there. So I think that helps as well. And as we mentioned earlier, the more visibility they give to what is new and being posted, it seems to be driving more interest in people submitting their ideas. So I think that's helping as well.
Okay. So I have another question. How can SharePoint security be enhanced on an employee-owned device? We use SharePoint 2010, and recently IT has started allowing iPads. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is actually a great question. There's multiple ways to enforce security. Clearly one way is through mobile device management, where through ActiveSync profiles you can enforce power-on passwords and those obvious things that I think a lot of organizations are doing already. The next thing you could do if a mobile device is under enterprise control, you can control or whitelist or blacklist which applications end up on the mobile device itself. Now, if you were to allow an application that was created that connects to your SharePoint, you've now created another layer of security. And the third way is through implementation of Active Directory or some kind of integration with your directory. So to do that, there's a series of calls that happen when you sign on to your SharePoint 2000 environments, 2010 rather. Was it 2013 or 10, Naima?
It was 2010.
2010, right. So 2010's got a series of authentication steps that if you kind of watch what happens in the communication between SharePoint and the mobile app, you can then do everything to satisfy your single sign-on requirements and authentication requirements while maintaining a nice connection to SharePoint. So really those three ways, right? Through the device security, through the use of the app that's going to access SharePoint on your device, and then through the application authentication on the application itself. Does that answer the question? If any follow-ups, please put them back in the window.
Okay. I have another question. How can you keep the documents in SharePoint 2010 from being downloaded to the mobile device?
Yeah, so great question. If you notice, if you guys have a chance to download this presentation, which we'll get some directions for in the future here, in that healthcare example, you'll see that certain files are marked for cloud only or on SharePoint only, whether it's on-prem or cloud, doesn't really matter. But you could actually, through an application programming interface, block the download of certain files, right? So part of the benefit of going the custom route is that that library for blocking files is already built into SharePoint, and you can do lots of things, right? You can control applications, a custom app to download certain files. You could also control an app from exporting files to other third-party apps on the mobile device. And again, through some of the Bitzer mobile tools, you can even prevent people from taking email attachments and putting them into unsecured locations.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, just talking about the Bitzer solution, so that's exactly what we address, the Bitzer Secure Container. You download any document from SharePoint in the container, and you can't take it out of the container. So there's inherent security when you are accessing your SharePoint from the Bitzer solution. So.
Yeah, and I think you have to test out these things, right? I mean, it's awesome to have that container, but you have to have your security people understanding, hey, look, we're downloading a file from SharePoint, but it's in a secure container that's, quite honestly, almost bulletproof. So it takes a little bit of an understanding of the organization to be comfortable with these things as well.
Okay. Next question is regarding file sync. Our organization uses SharePoint for storing all our email attachments. Is there a file sync style solution for enabling access to these attachments on the mobile phone?
Yeah, so the file sync use case, again, there's lots of different scenarios here, and there's multiple ways to proverbially skin the cat. So again, one way would be to access only those files within a folder within the email attachments, and again, if you use SharePoint, you're getting out of the box all the access controls and security and those types of things. Ernie or Naima, wondering if you guys had any other suggestions for how to enable such a use case.
I think the one thing that you probably want to mention, though, is that you certainly want to include the compliance teams and the records retention folks when you're doing something like that. If all of that is already in place and it's just an extension, then I think you're fine. But you do want to make sure that they're part of that discussion as well, right?
Absolutely, Ernie, you're right. And in terms of Frank's early comments for any other options out there, Bitzer has a product called the M Drive, which enables access to files and folders which are part of SharePoint, and it has all the authentication and secure access and built-in security with the overall Bitzer Beam solution. All right. So now we have a best practices questions, and this would probably, you could share some based on what the clients that you have worked with. What are the best practices for enforcing corporate data leakage policies? Does SharePoint allow endpoint data governance when I have downloaded documents?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would probably answer it through corporal punishment. No, I'm only kidding. Yeah, every client has a very distinct need to secure their information. We were actually just having conversations with a very large sports organization and the very attorney-driven organization where they want to ensure things weren't downloaded at all, right? They want everything to be VPN access in, only browse information, don't download it. E-discovery was a major requirement. So in that case, they were really doing browser-based access and really not getting the full collaboration tools such as offline access. So it just depends, right? I mean, there's so many questions to ask and so many different ways to handle that scenario. Wondering, Ernie or Naima, if you guys have any thoughts on that corporate type policy and how to enforce that. I mean, there's really tools and there's also policies, right? I mean, you could certainly have policies that dictate the way things should be, and you should have the tools to be able to trust and also verify that people are following those policies. But in some cases, some organizations are a little bit more trusting, some organizations are a little bit more closed-lipped.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is industry driven as well, right? Certain industries much stricter in that respect. I don't know that I would have anything additional to add over that, Naima, from what Frank's already called out, but certainly, as I mentioned earlier, having all the right participants from your organization involved. If you have a chief privacy officer, as an example, if that's a concern for you, ensuring that you're in line with their policies and procedures. And some organizations have all of that in place already, and others, the first time they start talking about it is when they're going through an effort like this. And I've seen both examples. So
yeah, I think that's true. I think there is that aspect of having policies, but I think if there's one thing that we have learned from the trend in mobility and BYOD is that the users have a very significant role to play. So we can have policies and organizations can pursue that, but at the end of the day, it's going to also depend on how those policies are enabled. So as long as we make it easy and user-friendly for the users to follow those data leakage policies and put some solutions in place that prohibit violating the policies, I think that is probably a good mix. That's where I see it. What do you guys think?
Well, here's the rub, right? Our chief legal compliance people and those stakeholders and any C-level exec or their direct reports, SVPs, whatever, they're not compensated to take on risk, right? So a lot of these, to Ernie's point, a new initiative comes out and they're trying to get it through some approval process, and no one's actually set up a center of excellence to solve these problems before they come up. And now you've got this probably a really compelling need to go mobile. Some business has everything lined up. They've got the applications, the systems, everything's in place, and they end up getting headbutting with people that are not compensated to take on risk. So what ends up happening is that we see lots of things live on in a pilot or prototype fashion. Some senior executive signs off on the risk, and then this pilot and prototype ends up becoming something much more of a production nature. And then eventually, I think enough of these come through and they break down the wall, and people realize, okay, well, it's here. Now let's organize in a way that is going to best support these capabilities, because without organizing to best support those capabilities, you're going to take on lots of different costs. Multiple different business units are going to try the same thing, often the same thing, duplicating, different costs and, hiring multiple vendors to do the same thing. But until an organization is really able to pull that together, that actually indicates to us, a level of maturity that this capability is going to really drive business value.
Good point. So just a quick reminder to everybody that after the end of the webinar, everybody will get an email that will allow you to listen to the webinar again, and you will have access to the presentations. I think we're getting some queries about that. So, and of course, you, as the resources indicate, you can get in touch with any of the presenters on the webinar for further discussion. So I think we're going to be up to our last question, which is about Bitzer. Obviously, somebody has been multitasking during the webinar. That's a surprise. And they've looked at the Bitzer product, and the question is, it does not require VPN for remote access, and how does it access the intranet SharePoint? So I can probably answer that. The Bitzer platform consists of a specialized app on mobile devices, which is called a container. It's something that Frank alluded to during his discussion about a secure container solution. The second piece of the software is a gateway, which is installed at the data center. And between the gateway and the app, it creates a secure channel, which we call the app tunnel. This is not a VPN, but it's rather a tunnel between the app and the gateway. And the distinction is it is not between the device and the gateway. So it essentially, the security, all the policies, all the control is within the container, and whatever personal apps or assets you have outside the container on your device, it's not IT's concern. So hopefully that answers the question. So I think we're ready to wrap up, unless Frank or Ernie, if you have any questions.
Nope, nothing on my end.
No, this is a great conversation. Really pleased to see everyone's competency in this capability.
Okay. Well, this brings our discussion to an end. For all the participants, thank you for joining us today. Please take a few minutes to share your comments in a survey that we will send your way. Also look up, as I said earlier, for an email in the next couple of days with links to the recording and the assets. Thank you so much, Frank and Ernie. It was great conversation, and we appreciate your time. It was great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mama.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.